Hey everyone, welcome back to what will likely be the last video on the City Skylines 2 Dev Diaries, as this is the final one revolving around actual gameplay. The last two are on sound and music in the game, and then on the cinematic camera and photo mode. However, if you are interested in a video on those two topics, leave a comment down below, and if there's enough interest, I can certainly cover those last two topics as well. But I suspect they'll appeal to a smaller audience. Regardless, getting back to today's video, this week's dev diary is on the citizen simulation and life path. I feel almost like a broken record saying this at this point, but the major takeaway from this dev diary is that everything is just so much more in-depth and realistic. And while there are a lot of familiar elements as far as simulation and life path go, there's a whole new level of depth in City Skylines 2 that by far and away did not exist in City Skylines 1. So for today's video, I'll quickly touch on what's familiar, and then get into the details of how those things are improved upon and changed in Cities 2. First, and obviously most importantly, pets. Pets are making a return in CS2, specifically dogs were mentioned. Next, the life path is in a general sense similar to Cities 1. Sims will either be born into or move into your city, and subsequently go about their lives on a pretty routine path. Happiness is a metric that can still be measured and is affected by the usual suspects, of not having pollution nearby, having ways to spend their free time, like shops nearby, etc. Health is still something we'll have to keep an eye on with our citizens, though with several upgrades in CS2. There will be different age groups, same as in CS1. Chirper, for better or worse, is making a return. Education and employment levels work similarly to City Skylines 1, and can directly affect and be affected by one another. And finally, tourists will still come and visit your cities, and your citizens can go visit other cities. Now, this is obviously a very quick rundown of things returning to CS2, but since much of them have been discussed in previous diaries, I think that's sufficient for now. It's what's new that's obviously the most interesting, some of which have been discussed in more detail in previous diaries, but we'll still touch on a couple things in today's video. So let's start back at the beginning with the simplest thing, the pets. While pets are in the game this time around as well, they don't contribute at all toward happiness and are purely for aesthetics. And I mentioned that this as new only because there was a policy in City Skylines 1 to ban pets, and that did negatively affect your Sim's happiness, which does not appear to be the case this time around. Next up is happiness, which has been significantly expanded upon for City Skylines 2. The most important difference is that when taking a look at the info view for happiness in Cities 2, we can see exactly what is making our citizens unhappy. Previously, in Cities 1, we just sort of had to guess, throwing in a dog bark and seeing if that did the trick. Now, it will be very clearly spelled out for us what things are affecting our citizens' happiness and by how much, either positively or negatively. And this will allow us to really take control of problems that arise in our cities and address issues directly, making things so much easier and so much more clear. And with happiness comes two major factors of influence. One which is familiar, health, and the other that is entirely new, well-being. Now when I say entirely new, I more or less just mean we didn't have a separate name or mechanic for this in Cities 1. It was just lumped under happiness in a very broad sense. But essentially well-being is what we would probably normally think of as happiness in the context of the game. And this is what is affected by basically the same things that we can guess affected happiness in Cities 1. But again, we just get to see more clearly just how much it's being affected. But per the diary, well-being refers to a Sim's mental state and sense of safety. A few things that impact this are whether they're in range of city services, for example, having reliable power, clean water, sufficient sewage coverage, so their plumbing doesn't back up, their proximity to pollution and garbage, as well as their proximity to all the other city services as well. For example, if they're in a higher crime area with no police coverage, their well-being is going to suffer. But we've discussed city services and how they relate to citizens previously in other videos, so we'll leave that there. If you need a refresher, check out the video linked above. New things to have a more profound impact on citizen well-being are things like having good postal coverage, access to high-speed internet, and having appropriate housing and commercial nearby. And as far as like the housing and commercial nearby being different, I mostly mean that Sims will want a specific kind of housing to be in. Families will want like bigger, more suburban kinds of housing, and that they will really be a lot more directly affected by the commercial nearby, as opposed to being fine traveling all the way across the city. These two were also discussed, however, in my video covering zoning and signature buildings, which you can also find linked above. Next is health. While health itself is not new in Cities 2, it's again just much more in-depth than it was in Cities 1. Previously, health was very simple. If you didn't put your water source over pollution, your Sims didn't really get sick. Clinics and hospitals were essentially park assets that, if placed when your Sims weren't already sick, just made people happy without really having much function. That whole system is reworked for Cities 2. While yes, pollution is still one of the main factors to influence health in Cities 2, it's not the only thing to do so. Your citizens can still become sick, even without being directly affected by some form of pollution. Each Sim will have a probability of becoming sick, depending on their health. If they do get sick, their health will decrease, and they'll either travel themselves, if they're not too sick to do so, to the hospital or clinic, or if they're too sick to travel themselves, an ambulance will come get them. Once a citizen is sick, or injured, like in a car accident, they have a probability of dying. It's a relatively low probability, but that probability is related to their overall health. If they were already less healthy once they fell ill, their probability of dying is higher than that of a very healthy Sim who got sick. Also, if they're older, they're more likely to get sick and die. And speaking of ages, there are 4 age groups: children, teens, adults, and elders. But as with everything else so far, there's more meaning and an influence to their lives and how they're simulated based on their age. Each group will have different needs and preferences on what they want to do and how much they're willing to spend doing it, which was talked about in my video on the traffic AI, which is linked above. Another completely new feature coming to City Skylines 2 is the Citizen Life Path. And what this means is that we can actually check in on each individual Sim and see what has happened in their lives. To do this, though, you have to click on a Sim in your city and click an option to follow them, which will add them to a list of followed citizens. From there, you're able to check back in on that Sim and any others that you followed and see their life path journal. This journal documents everything that has happened in their life from the moment you clicked follow. You can see all the details about them, such as their name, where they live, and their occupation, and it also has their chirper feed, where you can see more minute details of their lives, like them moving in or out with other Sims, getting married, getting new jobs, and other such things. And speaking of chirper, it's been expanded as well in Cities 2. I'm not exactly sure if this was a requested feature, but it's there. For better or worse, it's there. Though at least it does seem like it'll offer insight that's a bit more substantial than in Cities 1. It has the same basic functionality, except it sounds like it's actually functional. Something your citizens may complain about on Chirper can be liked by other Sims, indicating the importance of the issue to your city as a whole. I know, for example, in Cities 1, I got a million Chirper notifications about cutting down all the trees for the forestry industry, but it didn't seem like it actually made a difference to my Sims, and I was able to ignore it entirely. I assume you may have the same ability to, mute Chirper notifications, but if you do decide to keep them, it seems like they might be slightly more helpful this time around. But, as with everything else, we'll still have to wait and see. The diary goes into education next, but other than what's been covered in the City Services Dev Diary and my accompanying video linked above, there's not much else to add, so I won't go over it again. Moving on to employment, much of this has already been covered as well, but something that is a bit new in Cities 2 is that each worker has an impact on their employer's efficiency. Higher educated Sims have higher efficiency. However, if they take a job at a lower level, such as a highly educated Sim taking a job that only requires educated, they're only as efficient as the job itself, meaning they're not using all of their available skills and talents, so it's better to have the right educated Sim for the right job. Also new in Cities 2 is that Sims' health can directly impact their efficiency at work. Crime is another aspect that is expanded upon in Cities 2. Before, it just seemed pretty random where crime was occurring and why, and was a pretty empty mechanic. Each building now in Cities 2 has a crime probability, and Sims, particularly those with lower well-being, may decide the life of crime is for them, and they'll target a building with a high crime probability. Then they can either flee and get away from the police, free to commit another crime another day, or they'll be caught and sent to jail. From there, they'll be released as regular citizens again with a clean slate. It is worth mentioning, though, that if they're an older Sim, there is a probability of them dying while imprisoned. A Sim's need for leisure and whether that need is being fulfilled can also affect their happiness. There's city recreation in the form of indoor and outdoor recreation, commercial recreation such as shopping, and then entertainment like bars or restaurants. Which thing they'll prefer and when is determined by a few different factors that have been covered across a couple other different diaries, so we won't go into that here. Lastly, there are conditions that your Sims can have. These are essentially a status of a particular Sim, and there are 7 different conditions your Sims can have, none of which can be fixed directly, but solving their causes and or providing solutions can help them. Number 1 is sick. Sims who are sick will be unable to work, and the longer they're sick, the more likely they are to die. To fix this condition, they'll need medical treatment. Number 2 is injured. Injured Sims also cannot work and can become injured in traffic accidents or fires and disasters and will also need treatment. Number 3 is homeless. These Sims can neither pay rent nor afford to move out of your city and thus may take up residence in your parks. Number 4 is unwell. These are Sims with low well-being. Their work is beginning to be negatively affected while this condition is active, and these Sims may turn to crime. Number 5 is weak. These are Sims with low health. Again, their happiness and work are negatively affected at this stage, and they have a higher chance of getting sick and dying compared to other Sims. Number 6 is distressed. This happens when a Sim is in danger or trapped. They're in danger if they're in a burning building, and trapped if they're involved in a building collapse. And sometimes Sims that are in danger from a burning building can become trapped if the problem is not addressed fast enough. Number 7 is evacuated, and these are just Sims that are in an emergency shelter. And that's it. That is all the new stuff coming in Cities 2. Again, everything just seems so much more in-depth and realistic, and it's all very exciting. So I'm really looking forward to 1, getting to see some fabulous creators in the community poke around with the game on September 8th, I think, and 2, getting to play it myself when it finally releases. But otherwise, that is all for today. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, I hope you'll consider leaving a like below and possibly subscribing to the channel. And as I mentioned earlier, this will likely be the last of these Dev Diary videos from me, but if you are particularly interested in the last 2 on sound and music, and or the cinematic camera or photo mode, leave a comment below, and if there's enough interest, I can cover those ones as well. But for now, I'll leave it at that. Thanks again so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.